I paid for a wedding for 11 months before I ever heard either of her parents' names spoken out loud. I told myself that was normal. It wasn't. By the time I found out why she'd kept them from me, I understood that some silences aren't grief. Some silences are maintenance. Welcome back to Dad's Pure Revenge. If this is your first time here, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I like knowing where this story's landing. And if you've ever built your whole future on something somebody else was quietly hollowing out underneath you, hit subscribe because you already know how this one's going to feel. My name's Grant Ashworth. I'm 41. I run a small framing crew out of Millbrook, Ohio, and I've got a 9-year-old daughter named Lily from my first marriage, which ended clean and stayed clean. Her mother and I still do Thanksgiving together for Lily's sake, and neither of us has ever made the kid choose a side. I say that because it matters later. I know what it looks like when adults handle things the right way, even when it costs them something. I thought I knew what it looked like when they didn't. I was wrong about the shape it actually takes. My flaw. The one I own right now, so you don't have to wait for it. I don't ask enough questions when someone I love hands me a story that makes their pain look tidy. Danielle told me her parents were not in the picture, and I let that sentence do 11 months of work it never should have been allowed to do. Danielle Corbin came into the frame shop in March, needing a piece matted for her grandmother's funeral photo. She was 36, sharp, funny in a dry way that took me 2 conversations to catch up to. She was also, from the very first week, careful not shy, careful. She'd answer a question about her childhood with a fact and then steer the conversation somewhere else so smoothly I didn't notice the turn until we were 3 topics away. The first time I asked about her parents, she said, "They're not really part of my life anymore." I said I was sorry. She said, "Don't be." It was their choice, not mine, and reached for her coffee. And that was the end of it for almost a year. Here's the thing about Danielle that made all of this so much harder to see coming. She was good to people, genuinely. She remembered Lily's teacher's name after meeting her once. She drove 2 hours to sit with the CO worker's mother in the hospital because the CO worker couldn't get off shift. When my crew lost a guy's father to a heart attack in June, Danielle organized the meal train herself, brought casseroles to a man's house she'd met twice. I watched her be kind to strangers with a consistency that made the silence about her own parents feel like something private and painful, not something built. We got engaged in August at the Overlook off Route 9, and I proposed with my grandmother's ring, and Danielle cried in a way I'd never seen her cry before or since. I believed every second of it. I still believe that part was real. The wedding planning started in September, and this is where I need you to notice the pattern with me, because at the time, I didn't. Danielle handled the vendor deposits, all of them. She said it was easier since she had the spreadsheet brain for it, and I laughed and let her, because I was working 60-hour weeks trying to get ahead before the wedding so I could take 2 full weeks off after. In October, she told me the caterer needed another $1,400, cash preferred, and I gave it to her without asking. Why cash? In November, it was the florist I'd owe more. I didn't examine any of it. I told myself I was a man who trusted his fiancée with money, and that felt like a virtue instead of what it actually was, which was a man who'd stopped paying attention to his own wedding. The invitations went out the first week of December. I sat at Danielle's kitchen table in her apartment on Larkspur Court, addressing envelopes, and I noticed the parent line on the invitation template was blank on her side. Just Danielle Corbin, daughter of, and then nothing. I asked her about it, and she said quietly, not looking up from the envelope she was sealing, "My parents won't be there. They're not going to be part of this. Can we please just leave it blank?" I said, "Okay." That's the part I still sit with. I said, "Okay," and I sealed the next envelope. Thursday, December 11th, 6:58 in the morning, is when the first crack showed up, though I didn't clock it as a crack yet. Danielle's phone rang while she was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. It was sitting on the counter next to the coffee maker. Screen lit up. The caller ID said, "Renata D, Hospice Supply CO." I thought it was a wrong number or a business call. I didn't think about it again until January. The betrayal, when it finally showed itself, wasn't loud. It came from a woman named Renata Diaz, and it came by accident. Saturday, January 17th. I was picking up lumber from a supply yard in Fairview, 40 minutes outside Millbrook, and I stopped at a diner called the Wagon Wheel for coffee before the drive back. A woman at the next booth was on the phone, and she said a name that stopped me cold. Corbin. She said, Mr. Corbin's oxygen line needs replacing again, and Mrs. Corbin can't lift it herself anymore. I told the daughter 3 times now. I don't fully know why I turned around. I think some part of me had been listening for that name for months without admitting it. I said, excuse me, did you say Corbin? The woman looked at me like I'd caught her at something. Her name tag said Renata. She said, careful. Are you family? I said, I'm engaged to Danielle Corbin. Renata's face did something I'll never forget. It wasn't shock. It was relief mixed with something closer to grief. She said, then you need to know where her parents actually are. Harold and Marlene Corbin were living 11 minutes from that diner in a small rented house on Birchwood Lane, in a town Danielle had told me back in August didn't exist anymore for her. Harold was 74 and on oxygen for COPD. Marlene was 71 and had fallen twice in the last year. Renata had been their home health aide for 2 years, paid for out of Harold's pension, and she came anyway off the clock most Sundays because nobody else did. I asked her the question I was afraid of, does Danielle know they're here? Renata said, she's the one who moved them here 2 years ago, told them it was closer to good doctors. It's 40 minutes from her apartment and she visits maybe once a month. Always alone, always with paperwork. Sunday, January 18th, 11:14 in the morning. I drove to Birchwood Lane by myself and knocked on a door with peeling white paint, and Marlene Corbin answered it in a cardigan with a hole at the elbow. And I introduced myself as the man marrying her daughter, and she started to cry before I finished the sentence. Inside, the house was clean but sparse in a way that told its own story. No photos on the walls except one, a school picture of Danielle at maybe 7 years old, taped not framed to the refrigerator. Harold sat in a recliner with a cannula under his nose, and when he found out who I was, he said, she's getting married, not as a question. Like he'd read it somewhere, not been told. I asked him how he knew. He nodded toward a folder on the side table. Inside it were bank statements, automatic withdrawals, monthly, made out to a name I recognized instantly because I'd written checks to the same vendor myself, the wedding caterer. 6 months of withdrawals from Harold and Marlene's retirement account, $400 at a time, going straight into paying for a wedding they weren't invited to and didn't know they were funding. Danielle had power of attorney over her parents' finances. She'd had it since Harold's diagnosis 2 years earlier. She used it to move them somewhere quiet, and then she used it to move their money somewhere quiet too. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't angry about the money first. I was angry, later, quietly, about the fact that a woman capable of driving 2 hours for a CO worker's mother had let her own mother fall twice in a house with no one checking on her but a hired aide working off the clock for free. I didn't confront Danielle that day. I sat in my truck outside Birchwood Lane for 11 minutes before I could make myself drive. What flipped in me wasn't rage. It was something quieter and more permanent. The specific moment you stop asking a person to explain themselves and start deciding what you're going to do, regardless of what they say. I'd spent 11 months handing Danielle the benefit of every doubt. I had. Sitting in that truck, I ran out. If you've ever felt that exact shift, not the shouting kind of angry, but the done kind, tell me in the comments. Because I think more people carry that feeling than talk about it. Monday the 19th. I called an elder law attorney in Fairview, a woman named Patricia Ruiz, who'd handled a property dispute for my uncle years back. I told her everything. She told me 2 things. First, that Harold and Marlene, while frail, were both still legally competent, which meant they had every right to revoke a power of attorney themselves today if they chose to. Second, that if the withdrawals were what I described, Danielle's control over their accounts needed to end. Regardless of what happened between her and me, Tuesday the 20th, I drove Patricia Ruiz out to Birchwood Lane myself. Harold signed the revocation with a hand that shook from the oxygen, not from doubt. Marlene asked me to stay in the room while she did it, and she held my hand through the whole thing. And she said, you're the first person who's asked us what we wanted in longer than I can remember. Patricia helped them set up a new power of attorney that afternoon. To Renata Diaz, who'd been showing up for 2 years for people who weren't paying her to, and who didn't want the job and took it anyway, because somebody had to. I didn't tell Danielle any of this happened. I let the days count instead. Wednesday, she texted twice about seating charts. Thursday, 4 texts, still just wedding logistics. Friday, the withdrawal bounced. The caterer called her about the missed payment, and the text changed, 11 that day. By Sunday, it was 29. By the following Tuesday, 38, most of them just my name over and over, no message attached. She had no idea yet what had actually happened. She only knew something had stopped working, and she didn't know why. She showed up at the frame shop that Wednesday afternoon, January 28 th, 4:40 in the evening, and she said, "My dad's account is locked. The caterer's threatening to cancel." "What did you do?" I told her plainly, Birchwood Lane, Renata, the folder of statements, Patricia Ruiz, the new power of attorney. I watched her face while I said it, waiting for shock, for denial, for anything. What I got instead was quiet, the kind of quiet Danielle always used to control a room. Except this time, it wasn't controlling anything. It was just empty. She said, "You had no right." I said, "I had every right. I was about to marry into that family. I just met it 11 months late." She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She said, "You don't understand what it costs to take care of them," and I told her the truth, which was that I just spent 4 days watching a stranger do it for free, and I didn't understand how Danielle had managed to make caring for her parents sound like a burden while making everyone believe there was nothing left to care for at all. My voice didn't rise once during that whole conversation. It didn't need to. Danielle left the shop the same way she'd walked into it 11 months earlier, composed, sharp, already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. Except this time, there was nowhere left for her to steer it. I called off the wedding on February 2nd. I paid the deposits. I could still recover and let the rest go. I didn't take Danielle to court over the money that had already been spent. Patricia told me I could have. And I decided I didn't want to spend one more month of my life measuring what I was owed by a woman who'd measured her own parents by what they could still provide. Harold Corbin died in April, at home on Birchwood Lane, with Renata Diaz beside him and Marlene holding his hand. I was there too. Danielle wasn't. Not because anyone stopped her, but because by then Marlene had stopped calling to tell her things, and Danielle had stopped asking. I still visit Marlene most Sundays. Lily comes with me sometimes and helps her water the one tomato plant she keeps by the back step. It doesn't fix what happened to her. It doesn't need to. I'm not there to fix anything. I'm there because somebody finally decided to be on purpose without being asked twice. I don't know if Danielle has ever gone back to Birchwood Lane. I know I'm not waiting to find out. And that not waiting is its own kind of answer. I got engaged to a woman I thought had no family left to protect. It turned out she had 2 people who needed protecting from her the whole time. And once I saw that clearly, I stopped needing anything from Danielle at all. Not an apology, not an explanation, nothing. That's not the same as peace. It's better. It's just done. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. And if you've ever had to choose between someone you loved and someone who actually needed you, tell me which one you picked and how you knew.